Welcome into Instant Reaction, an Indianapolis Colts podcast, and we are reacting to a tough Monday Night Football loss the Colts suffer to the San Francisco 49ers, 48-27. I am Casey Vallier, joined by Amanda Foster, our Colts.com writer. And Amanda, I appreciate you helping out here. Typically, it's Bill Brooks. He is still on doing radio, so we figured we'd get this out as early and quick as we can. Now, typically, I hop on 2-minute drill with you on Fridays,
hmm
but here you are. You're helping me out here after a tough loss here on Monday Night Football. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Very happy to hop on. And I mean, you talk about early. It technically is the morning because we're recording this at like one
That's
o'clock in the
true.
morning.
You're right.
So, regardless, no, happy to be here despite the unfortunate outcome of tonight's game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, crushing loss, and especially when you think of all of the implications heading into the game. You know, you're looking at the playoff picture and how the Colts didn't get a lot of help. They needed to help themselves with a victory. That doesn't happen. And now with this Colts loss, we see the Jaguars, the Bills, and Chargers all clinch a playoff berth. So the AFC playoff picture is starting to really, narrow itself down to just two spots really up to grabs. One of them is going to be whoever wins the AFC North, so that division winner, and that final wild card spot that's essentially between the Colts and the Texans. So we'll really see what happens after these next couple weeks. But diving into this game here, Amanda, you know, you lose and you lose in, pretty big fashion. 48-27, that's a big loss. But I thought there was some bright spots that this Colts team, especially offensively, we saw, and I think we should start with Phillip Rivers. He was able to push the ball down the field a lot more tonight than he was last week. Now, we heard Shane Steichen talk about how it's going to be game plan specific, and the game plan was set up for Seattle. It's going to be different than the game plan for San Francisco, and we saw that early and often. He was, throwing the ball. He threw for 277 yards with a couple touchdowns. Did have that pick six late in the fourth there. But I think outside of that one throw, I think Phillip Rivers looked pretty good and was able to push the ball down the field.
Yeah, I mean, you see the first pass of the game or the first attempt of the game is an incompletion to Michael Pittman down there deep. And I was kind of like, okay, what are we doing? Because we expected there to be more Jonathan Taylor involved from the get-go just
Right.
because of the 49ers run defense was not the best coming into this game. We saw how Phillip and Jonathan worked together against Seattle. So that was definitely, I think, a surprise to a lot of people to think like, okay, here we go. But then, like you said, you saw it evolve over the course of the game. And I mean, it came together pretty quickly in that first drive of hitting Alec Pierce for the 20-yard touchdown. And then it just kept going and going. And it was an unexpected performance from Phillip in a good way because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people didn't think that he could still do that. And, it's not like he's slinging it 40, 50, 60 yards downfield. He couldn't ever do that to begin with. But the fact that he is decisively and confidently getting it out 15, 20, 30, 35 yards, whatever it might be, and just finding all the right spots and connecting with the right people in the right moments is exactly why he was brought in the first place. And we saw that obviously despite the result. I mean, you put up 27 points. That's not a bad showing for an offense. It's just when the defense is struggling the way that the Colts did, giving up 41 points minus the pick six, like you said, it's hard to find the balance between thinking, okay, we did a good job offensively, but it clearly wasn't good enough because you still lost the game, but then you can't score 40 points every game because that's just not how football works. So
Right.
it's a very, the locker room, the media room, there were so many mixed feelings of how to balance the success on one side of the ball with the lack of success on the other side of the ball in a game like this because it's just so disproportionate.
No, that's a great point. And, a couple things on the Phillip Rivers front. You mentioned his ability to command the offense, and I think we saw that in multiple ways. And I think one of them was just him making the check the line of scrimmage, switching out of plays. To think that he's only been inside this offense for, you could call it 2 weeks now, but ultimately, I mean, this is brand new. I know it's not brand new to him, but he's doing with essentially a brand new cast of characters. So, he's not used to, today it was a lot more Danny Pinner than Tanner Bortolini, but making the checks with the center and having that connection and all that stuff, I thought that was pretty impressive to see the command and how much he really does have control of this offense, even though he just got to town, a week and a half ago, if you will. But then also, you think back to the year when Phillip Rivers was here with the Colts, and he didn't get the opportunity to play in front of a packed house here at Lucas Oil Stadium. I think the max he saw was somewhere in the 12 to 15,000 range during that COVID season. So he gets to come back to Lucas Oil Stadium in front of a Monday night packed house. And, it was funny that first drive, the Colts offense, they go down and score a touchdown, and they show him up on the Jumbotron, and he's getting the crowd going. That was really, really cool to kind of see him kind of get those flowers that, a lot of these guys, all these fans, they may have watched Phillip Rivers during that year when he was the Colts quarterback, mainly at home because of the COVID restrictions. So it was kind of cool to see him get that. But one thing that I do want to talk about that you mentioned, Amanda, with Alec Pierce,
Hmm.
we have continued to see his game evolve. Today he had his first multi-touchdown game of his career. He finishes with 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he is having a massive 2025 season. He just continues today in an area where a lot of people had kind of written him off because we talked about Phillip Rivers and the lack of the aerial passing game. They said, well, that means Alec Pierce is not going to be, being able to be found in this offense. He made his name found early and often. You think about it, 86 yards and a couple touchdowns, another big day for Alec Pierce.
Oh yeah, I mean, averaging 21.5 yards per catch. That's Alec Pierce in a nutshell.
Yes, it
But at
is.
the same time, like you said, I mean, 4 receptions for 86 yards, 2 touchdowns, and it wasn't like a big 65 or 75-yard reception and a couple little ones here and there. It was very consistently like between 15 and 20 and then
Yeah.
one 33-yard reception. So exactly like you said, he's proving himself to be just as effective in the intermediate game and as a physical player with the yards after the catch and everything we've seen from him as well as, being that ultra fast guy that you can trust down deep field. So it is, I mean, he was due for a touchdown. It felt like he had one against the Texans, but hadn't, had a lot of involvement in the more recent games. So it was nice to see him have such a big game and have the fans be able to cheer for him because everybody has grown very fond of him in this fan base after what he's done in the last year and a half or so.
No, absolutely. And also one of the things that he does super well is he draws pass interference calls. We saw
Yes.
two of them today. One of them was declined because I'm not sure how he was able to catch the pass in the end zone,
Right.
but defender draped all over him. He's able to get a touchdown, but then, on a big key third down, he's able to draw a pass interference. That is one thing that he does better than, if you ask me, I think he's better than anybody in the league at drawing those pass interference calls. And I know they don't count towards his total, but that is one
They
thing that if I
should.
had to make a note, I think that should be counted because it's due to him and due to that play that the team is able to advance the football to where they do. So I think there's got to be some way that you can include those numbers in a statistical standpoint for players, but they never asked me my opinion on how they count these guys' stats. But if I'm looking at it, I also credit him with those yards as well because
Yeah.
those were massive to pick up there. Now, one of the guys offensively that didn't have quite the game that we were kind of anticipating was Jonathan Taylor. We saw the Titans were able to run all over the Niners last week, and we kind of anticipated maybe Jonathan Taylor could get going against the Niners who weren't great against the run. He has just 46 yards on the ground on 16 carries, which is just 2.9 yards per carry. Those are not numbers you're typical seeing out of Jonathan Taylor. He just wasn't able to get anything going.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of touched on it earlier, like that we expected to see Jonathan Taylor today a little bit more, but that also comes with the territory of being Jonathan Taylor, is that teams are going to want to stop you. And especially after the way he started this season, I mean, he was phenomenal, but then that shows teams what to do to try to stop you as well. So
Right.
it's like it's the back and forth thing of like when you're playing really well, then you're going to have to figure out how to adapt, or you might not be able to adapt depending on the circumstances. I mean, today, for example, you were missing Braden Smith and Bernard Ryman coming into the game, lost Tanner Bortolini in the first or second series in the first quarter, and then you have all these rotating pieces with other injuries and people coming in and out. And we saw how crucial the offensive line was to Jonathan Taylor's success in the beginning of the season. And that stays true till now because that's just part of the run game is having a very strong and effective offensive line. And it's not to say that the guys that were out there today are not strong or effective, but it's just not quite the same. And because everything has fluctuated so much in the last few games and you know what teams are trying to do and like other teams know that you've got, a rookie on the line or you've got a backup on the line. And so they're going to try to take advantage as well and figure if they can stop Jonathan Taylor, then they can control other parts of this Colts offense in the same sense. So it's everything is so, you know, I combine it all plays a part together. So it's not, you can't single it out one way or another. But I mean, it is true. Jonathan Taylor was not the Jonathan Taylor that we were expecting today.
No, and ultimately, when you think about it, Jonathan Taylor has been arguably the best running back in football this year. But if you want to stop the run, simply numbers don't lie. If you decide we are going to dedicate 8 to 9 guys against the run,
Yep.
sometimes you can't block everybody. So there is abilities for teams to eliminate, if you will, a team's running game. And sometimes you sacrifice other things. And I felt like today the Colts were able to explore and exploit some of those options where San Francisco may have been selling out a little bit more for the run. They were able to get them, the passing game a little bit more, but it did hurt as far as the balance goes with the offense. And you talk about Jonathan Taylor not being able to really get going. That is in large part one of the things that I think was holding the offense back. Now, flipping over the defense side of the ball, the defense allows 41 points, 0 punts. You did have the one takeaway, but outside of the takeaway, I mentioned there were no punts. The only time that the 49ers didn't end up scoring was on the 64-yard field goal at the end of the first half. That if it was a 63-yard field goal, if they would have gotten a yard or two more, we would be looking at a completely different score, too, because that field goal was good from 63, just wasn't good from 64 where they attempted it as, it hit off the front of the post. But, the defense just wasn't able to get their grips on what this San Francisco offense was trying to do today. And they were able to kind of do whatever they wanted, Brock Purdy included. I mean, he looked about as good as you've seen him. I mean, he throws for 5 touchdowns today, a career high, and it was the big dogs. It was Christian McCaffrey. It was George Kittle. So all of the guys that you knew you needed to defend, the Colts defense just couldn't keep them contained.
Right. And I mean that was one of the more perplexing parts of this game is that you see how good this team was or this defense was against Seattle last week. And you think you have DeForest Buckner coming back. That's another massive piece. That's a big leader. That's a big
Yeah.
guy on the defensive line. And then you go out and you have a showing like that is everybody was, I think, a little bit shell shocked to just see it kind of pile up and snowball, if you will. And I mean that's a defense full of a lot of very prideful guys who clearly in the locker room after the fact they felt like they left a lot out there. DeForest Buckner said he felt
Yeah.
like he left a lot out there. They were all very, aware of what happened and how things went wrong. But I mean, yeah, it was one of those things where you were just watching it and you're like, they couldn't get a stop, they couldn't do anything in the red zone, and there was a lack of pass rush that was very noticeable for much of the game where Brock Purdy he took his time and
Yep.
found somebody who was able to create separation against a secondary and people in coverage that are more inexperienced because you're missing Charvarius
Right.
Ward and you're missing Sauce Gardner and you have Kenny Moore out there, but then you target whoever Jonathan Taylor or Jonathan Edwards is on or someone like that. And like the 49ers were able to pick apart the weaknesses of this Colts defense in a way that we just haven't seen this season in any shape or form, really.
Yeah, and that's one thing too that you talk about picking on guys. I mean, I also thought that Juwan Jennings made his name in this game for the Seahawks or for the 49ers because I think he was able to find some creases. He had a touchdown. I think he had over 80 yards receiving. And that's one thing we've become, I'm not saying accustomed to, but we have seen more and more of teams' best players having some of their better games against the Colts. George
Hmm.
Kittle had yet to go over 100 yards receiving this year. Everybody knows how good George Kittle is, and he's able to have a season high in receiving yards.
Right. And he
Christian
sat out for
McCaffrey,
a bit
yeah,
because he
that's
got
right. I mean,
hurt
he
late in the
essentially
game.
didn't even play a majority of the fourth quarter because of the ankle injury that he was dealing with. And I mentioned there that Christian McCaffrey ran for over 100 yards. From a running game standpoint this year, Christian McCaffrey has kind of struggled. It has been a rushing offense that they've used it, but it hasn't been something they relied so heavily on. I mean, he was averaging just 3.5 yards per carry coming into the game. He wasn't over 1,000 yards, and they were able to impose whatever they wanted to in the run game, which was something we did not expect to see because the Colts came in as the number one rushing yards per carry team in football.
Right.
And the Niners, they were 31st in yards per carry. So that was an area that I thought the Colts would have the upper hand, especially when you bring back a guy like DeForest Buckner. But they were able to do some things in the run game. Now, that is one thing about Kyle Shanahan. He is very well versed as an offensive mind, and he, does some things differently, and that definitely played a factor in the difference on Monday night. But those were a couple things that I didn't think we were going to see. I didn't think we would see Christian McCaffrey have, the amount of scrimmage yards, over 150 scrimmage yards, and then George Kittle over 100 yards. But then Brock Purdy to be able just to sit back in the pocket and complete 5 touchdown passes, a career high. Those are numbers that it doesn't matter what you do offensively, you're not going to win many football games.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's just I hate to say it, especially at this point in the season, but it felt like everything that could have gone wrong did go
Yeah,
wrong to a certain point. Like once you get, you go into halftime, you think maybe they make some adjustments. 49ers come out and immediately score right out of halftime. And then it kind of was just like, okay, this is where we're at.
yeah,
And no matter what the offense did, no matter what they tried, if the defense couldn't get a stop, it's only going to do so much because the
right.
49ers already have a lead. And so it was kind of that, like the whole second half, you were just kind of sitting there thinking, okay, we need to stop, we need to stop. And there were no stops. And I hate to minimize it because it's not just that, is that everything went wrong. But I mean, from a fan perspective, from somebody watching, that is kind of what it felt like. You think about like Cam Bynum gets the pick, 3 plays later,
Right.
49ers get a pick six. And so you have that glimmer of hope and then just as quickly it's gone. And so that's kind of that was how it ended. And unfortunately it was just kind of like, okay, yep, that's what happened. That's how this game went. And that's not how the team is going to take it. Obviously, they're going to take it and use it going forward. But from, in a more outside perspective, from a fan perspective, it was very much just like, all right, here we are. So,
Yeah, and ultimately, if you look, you compare these two games. I'm going to put them together because they're the two Philip Rivers started games. If you look at Seattle and you look at San Francisco, it's so much different when you play with a lead, and that is where the Colts were in Seattle. Now, ultimately, they didn't close that game out the way they wanted to, but it just changes the whole complexity of the game. And I thought in this game against the Niners, you were constantly trying to just keep up, keep pace
right.
with San Francisco because you mentioned it, the struggling of the defense to kind of limit the 49ers to do what they wanted to do. Now, one final thing here to put a close on instant reaction following this Monday night loss for the Colts against the 49ers is kind of where we go from now. So it's a crushing loss, and you can look at playoff implications. I think right now this loss puts the Colts at just like a 1% chance to reach the postseason. They essentially need to win out, and they need Houston to lose out. And, there may be some other scenarios that we'll have to learn as the week goes on because there's much smarter people than I that come up with all these, ways here, tiebreaker there. But essentially, for the Colts, they've signed up for 17 games. Shane Steichen mentioned that. The players mentioned that. And they know that the 16th game of the season comes up next Sunday against the Jags, who already got their number once. That was the Daniel Jones game. I'm sure there's a lot of really sour tastes in a lot of the players' mouths
Mm-hmm.
about that game because it was a hard one to really digest because
Right.
early on they looked pretty good, and then you have a catastrophic injury to your quarterback, and it kind of changes the way that anything rolls. So then everything just kind of catapulted and bounced around and went the Jags' way very quickly, and all of a sudden that game was out
Yeah.
of reach. So you look at all of that, and for a Colts perspective, it's a chance to get a little bit of payback on a divisional rival in Jacksonville. This time it's at home. It's your final home game of the regular season. So you stack all that stuff up. It's about as must win as you're going to get if you want to continue your season. So here we go. Just another big week of preparation, a big game, and it's mixed in there with, you have the big holiday coming up on Thursday that, throws a little bit of everybody gets some positive vibes going because at the end of the day, you got 2 games left to really prove you can be a playoff team.
Right. Well, and I mean, first of all, like you said, there's a little bit of added motivation for these next two games, given that it's the Jaguars and the Texans and the
Yep,
history with them, whether it's this season or in the past, and division games just kind of mean more. And then, like Philip Rivers said, just kind of keeping in perspective of like you have two more NFL games to go out and play, and this is
yep,
what people want, and not to like diminish the fact that this team is has slim chances of making it to the playoffs and everything. Like it is, this is a very disappointing loss, but at the same time, like these players do have that perspective of like if someone were to ask them, take Philip Rivers for example, hey, you want to go play two more games in the NFL?
that's
They're
right.
gonna say yes. Like, and Philip is a great example of that. But like, it's two more games that you can go out there and try to get a win, feel good about yourselves. Like you said, with the holidays, there's hopefully more positivity going around. So it is. I mean, it's as must win as you can get, like you said. But you kind of just have to let things play out and on one side not take it too seriously and put too much pressure on it because if you make things too big, then that usually blows back. Like you have to keep the same
Right.
routine that you've kept all season. But everybody knows how big these two games are, and there's no getting around that.
Absolutely. Well, Amanda, I got to say, well done.
Thank you.
Well done. You filled in
Thank you.
admirably. I will let Bill know that, I don't know how safe his job is moving forward.
I
I'm
think Bill
just
and I
kidding.
offer different enough perspectives that will be good.
No, I completely agree, and I really do appreciate you hopping in and joining us. And I wish it was better circumstances. I wish we were talking about, a massive win, and now you're looking, okay, this is what you need to happen, and this and this and this. Well, ultimately, what it all is going to boil down to is taking it essentially a day at a time, heading into next Sunday. You have a massive, massive game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. As I mentioned, the final home game of the regular season here inside Lucas Oil Stadium. It's a 1 o'clock kick, Eastern time zone. You have a chance to get a revenge game against the Jags, who you fell to them a couple weeks ago down in Jacksonville. But we will have you all set all week on Colts.com. Amanda's probably got four things she's writing right now as she's doing this that are
In the
going to be
moment,
up.
I'm
So, yeah,
multitasking.
I understand completely. So, thank you so much for all of your work, and we will read it all week. And if I don't talk to you before then, hope you have a wonderful holiday this week.
Thank you. You too.
Awesome. Well, once again, the Colts fall to the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football, 48-27. This has been Instant Reaction, part of the Indianapolis Colts podcast. Everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us, and have a happy holidays.